Hello world and welcome to this video. So today I'm going to do something a little bit different. So rather than talk about creativity or modular synth or whatever, I thought I would do something a little bit more light-hearted and have a look at some of the iconic films that I have enjoyed watching throughout my life, and yeah, just kind of go through like a history of iconic films that feature electronic music soundtracks. So a lot of these films are films that I have watched many times. Some of them I might only have watched once or twice, but many of them I've watched many times, and they are often sources of inspiration. On some days when you feel like, nothing's really working or whatever, or you just want to watch, you just want something that's going to inspire. One of these films is a great way to sort of get yourself back in the zone, get yourself inspired, and then hopefully want to go and make some more music. So that's what I'm going to do today. I'm going to go through a little rundown. It's not necessarily, well, no, it's definitely not. It's not a ranking video because I'm going to go through them in chronological order, starting with the earliest. And that way I can hopefully avoid any arguments of why is that film better than that film or that music better than that. Although I'm sure that still will be the case because I've probably not included certain films that people like. Before we go on though, I would just like to remind you, if you do enjoy these videos, you can always hit the like button, and if you want to see more, hit the subscribe button. I know there's lots of people out there watching the videos that aren't subscribed, which is great, but it really does help me if you hit the subscribe button as well. And if you do want to support me further, you can buy me a coffee with the link in the description, and you can also sign up to my Patreon, which I am going to get that sorted soon, but the link is there. You can join as a free member to start, and then I'm going to start putting stuff over on Patreon as well fairly soon. So without further ado, let's get into this list of films. Okay, so the first film, and this is a film that I remember watching as a child, and I probably didn't really pay much attention to the music at the time. It was just an old sci-fi film that I enjoyed watching. Probably my dad showed it to me, and it's just like a classic sci-fi film, and this is The Forbidden Planet, which of course has Leslie Nielsen as one of the main actors. Leslie Nielsen of the fame from the Naked Gun films, in a little bit more of a serious role here, and at an earlier point in his career. So yeah, if you're not familiar with The Forbidden Planet, you should definitely check it out. It is from, I think, 1956, and it's an early sci-fi film, and it's the story of a spaceship crew that land on a distant planet. I think contact has been lost with this planet, so they're kind of sent to find out what's going on. And there's a scientist on this planet with his daughter, and they've unearthed some ancient civilization and technology of this civilization on this planet, and it sort of manifests as some kind of invisible terrible force that wreaks havoc and kills some of the crew and so on. And obviously Leslie Nielsen's character has to save the day and save the girl in the end, as probably is often the case in these sorts of films from the 50s. So Forbidden Planet, yeah, it's an old film, 1956, and I believe it's the first film to feature a fully electronic music score. The composers were Bibi and Louis Barron, and at the time I think there was sort of a lot of reluctance to credit them with a musical score. There was fear that this kind of electronic music, if it made it into the mainstream, it would overshadow the work of real composers and real musicians. So on the actual film, I think they're credited with something like original sound score or something like that, rather than music. So of course the score itself is very experimental. It's the early days of experimental electronic music, and some of the music that's in the film is credited as being the music of this alien race, the Krell, and that is where we get the often termed the Krell patch, which I have in some of my videos have done some music which sounds a little bit like a Krell patch. But yeah, the Krell patch, it's this kind of bleeping, random kind of, how to describe it, random bleeping kind of noisy sort of patch that doesn't really have any melody or structure or rhythm to it. And the origin of that description comes from this film, Forbidden Planet. A lot of the music in the film was also, I think it was created with sort of hand-built instruments and circuits which would often destroy or self-destruct after they were used. So it was kind of like a one-take thing, and then every piece of music in the film is kind of unique, and it really did sort of pave the way for electronic music to be used in other films, and really sort of showed that electronic music was something that could be used as in film scores. Okay, the next film is a film which I'm sure many of you will know, and that is A Clockwork Orange, 1971, and the composer there is Wendy Carlos. Wendy Carlos is, I'm sure, somebody who needs no introduction, and is a pioneer of the sort of early synth music, especially with her album Switched on Bach, which took a lot of classical music and sort of reinterpreted it with synthesizers. So she produced the soundtrack to the film, which was again sort of heavily inspired by classical music, but was all performed on the Moog synthesizer. I think like the Moog modular synthesizer, as it would have been then. And again, it's probably one of the earliest films to use electronic music in the soundtrack, albeit that it is 15 years after the Forbidden Planet. But yeah, sort of combining the classical works of Beethoven, Purcell, Rossini within the synthesizer realm, which just kind of really gives that sort of, I don't know, eerie kind of mechanical nature to the soundtrack, which sort of perfectly suits the whole kind of vibe of the film. The next film that I have chosen is from 1977, and it's a film that's probably, well, I don't know if it's that well known, and it's called Sorcerer. So the soundtrack to this film was composed by Tangerine Dream, and I think it was possibly the first film track that they composed. So the film itself, I think the main actor is Roy Scheider, who is obviously more famous for the Jaws films, and it basically sort of tells the story of four criminals who are they're in exile, and they're on sort of they take on a job transporting unstable explosives through South American jungle, and it's basically the story of them having to sort of do that task. So again, it's another early example of sort of a fully synth-driven soundtrack to a film in sort of like the early Hollywood. Well, I don't know. Do we call 1977 early Hollywood? Maybe, I don't know. And yeah, it's another one of these films that really sets the precedent for later films that came in the 80s and so on, that really sort of drew heavily on synthesizer music. What's interesting is that so they were given the script for the film and asked to write all of the music without actually seeing any of the footage of the film. So in that respect, the music itself was written before the film was made, and probably had a sort of, I don't know, it probably shaped some of the tone of the film more directly than you would expect from a compositional work. So the music itself, it's kind of this sort of dark, pulsing, hypnotic. There's a lot of experimental sequences in there, and it really kind of shows the sort of tension and the sort of psychological descent that the characters go through as they are on this journey transporting this explosive material. The film itself, I think it was overshadowed by Star Wars, which came out at the same time, so that's probably why it's a film that's not so well known today, but it does have kind of like a small cult following and is definitely worth checking out. Okay, the next film in my list here, we are now into the 80s, and no prizes for guessing what this next film is going to be. It is, of course, Blade Runner 1982 by Vangelis, the soundtrack by Vangelis. And, well, I don't think I really need to explain what Blade Runner is about. If you've never seen the film Blade Runner and don't know what it's about, go and check it out. I can't think there's many people that haven't seen it, though. So yeah, I mean, this is probably one, when people talk about synth music or electronic music in films, this is probably one of the films that comes up as being the most influential. It probably turned a lot of people onto synthesizers and electronic music, and in particular it is that sort of sound of the Yamaha CS80, which it's so expensive to buy now. It's probably sort of impossible to own one of those, although there are I've forgotten the name of the company, but there is a synth out there called Deckard's Dream, which is also quite expensive, and it's kind of in that sort of CS80 vibe. But yeah, so that the soundtrack is just amazing. It just really captures the sort of the dystopian world of Blade Runner and the sort of melancholy of the film, and sort of that world that's decaying but still has kind of like a beauty to it. And it sort of, it really does kind of set the tone for the film, and also like the deep use of pads and reverb, and that whole kind of vibe is just, we see that all over YouTube now in sort of I don't know what do you call it, sort of these sort of instrumental channels where music for falling to sleep or music for studying, whatever. You get these live stream channels where it'll be this kind of sort of deep wave synth music, and a lot of that is kind of directly sort of influenced by the sort of Blade Runner soundtrack. So yeah, that is that one, Blade Runner. Okay, the next one on my list. Actually, before I go to the next one on my list, I probably should just mention Blade Runner 2049, which of course was composed by Hans Zimmer, but it still kind of follows in that vein, and I guess the original soundtrack very much inspired the soundtrack of the later film. I haven't included that one in this list because I thought it was too much to include two Blade Runners, but that film, by itself, it kind of is still a great film, and another film with a great soundtrack that I always enjoy watching as well. Anyway, on to the next one. Right, so the next film, I think we're up to number 7 now. This is I couldn't decide between two films, but the one that I chose, so both films were anime films, both I think made by the same film studio, and yeah, but the one that I chose, and the reason I chose it really was because I'd watched it a lot more times than the other one. The one that I chose was Ghost in the Shell. So I think that came out in 1995. Composer was Kenji Kawai. If that's how you pronounce that. So I say this film is probably one of my all-time favourite films that I've watched so many times over and over. And yeah, one of my favourite anime films. And it's just a classic film. I think at one point the sort of main theme was my ringtone on my phone, back when we had sort of old-fashioned phones. Well, not that you can't have a ringtone on your smartphone, but I don't seem to do that anymore. Anyway, so this film, it kind of stands out because it's sort of it blends the kind of like electronic music through sort of a lot of drones, but it blends and sort of fuses that with more kind of like traditional Japanese sounds as well. There's a lot of sort of choral chanting. There's a lot of layers, and it's a really eerie soundtrack, which sort of perfectly matches the film and the themes of what's going on in the film. And although it's got this eeriness, but it's also got this kind of like organic quality as well, which I think comes from the sort of the fusing of that sort of traditional Japanese music with a lot of the electronic music as well. Which kind of, when you think about what the film is about, and it's thinking about fusing human personalities with synthetic AI personalities and technological bodies and so on. So that kind of, works very well. The next film, number 8. So this is a film that I think I've only seen once, quite a long time ago. And it's a good film. I don't really know why I've never watched it again. Maybe just never had the opportunity. I think it was probably just something that came on TV once and then I've never sort of seen it again. But this is the film Pi, and the composer is Clint Mansell. So if you've never seen this film, it's about this kind of like paranoid mathematician who's searching for some kind of like hidden numerical pattern in nature, and it just kind of like spirals into sort of obsession and madness. And the film's just kind of like his descent into madness. I think it's shot in black and white, if I remember. So it's a very kind of like dark, industrial, kind of minimalist electronic score, which sort of mirrors a lot of the themes in the film. Again, paranoia and obsession. There's a lot of sort of glitchy, distorted, repetitive motifs in there, and I think it's one of the sort of first kind of like mainstream films that features sort of like drum and bass type music in the soundtrack as well. Even though it's quite a sort of minimalist kind of score at the same time. So for Clint Mansell, I think this might have been his first film, perhaps, and then obviously he's gone on to do lots of other films since then. So that is Pi, definitely a film worth checking out there with a really great soundtrack. Right, the next film is actually a film that I have not seen, but I have listened to the soundtrack, and I don't know why that is. And I don't know how I came across the soundtrack in the first place. It's a bit strange, isn't it, to have like listened to the soundtrack to a film but never actually seen the film. Anyway, so the next film on my list is The Social Network, which came out in 2010. Soundtrack written by Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross. So obviously the film itself is about Facebook and the rise of Facebook, and everything that goes on there. I can't really talk much about it because I've not seen it. If you have seen it, let me know in the comments. Is it worth watching? The soundtrack's good, so I assume that it must be. So it's quite a sort of minimalist score. Again, sort of droning synths, a lot of tension in the score. And it's just an album that I enjoy listening to quite a lot. And if you're familiar with Trent Reznor's work, then I guess it's kind of sort of typical of what he does. But it just it goes to show that I think the film itself was quite a successful film, and so you can have these sort of major sort of drama type films that have this electronic score in them, because I think there still is, as much as electronic music is used in films nowadays, there still is a tendency to have your sort of traditional orchestral score, especially for sort of more kind of like mainstream drama type films. So really, this film, it kind of showed that you could have that type of film, but still have an electronic score in there as well. Okay, so the next film on my list, where are we up to now? I think this is this 8? I've lost track, to be honest. Never mind. So the next film is it's from just slightly after the last one. Just need a little drink. In 2011. Composer is Sinoya Caves. Again, not sure of the pronunciation of the name there. But the film is Beyond the Black Rainbow. So it is about it's about a young woman who's got sort of psychic abilities, and she's trying to escape some kind of research facility where there's evil doctors, scientists, people, and so on. So again, it's a heavily sort of synth-based score. It's probably quite heavily influenced by Tangerine Dream and some of those earlier 70s scores that I mentioned, or just 70s synth music in general. It's quite a sort of eerie, slow-moving kind of thing, which sort of really creates this sort of hypnotic, dreamlike state, which perfectly fits the movie. But it also has this sort of what's it sort of this kind of like retro futuristic kind of sound, which it's sort of there's a word for it. It sort of evokes nostalgia, even though you don't necessarily have experienced that in the first place. There's a word for that. But yeah, so it is drawing very heavily on, I guess, like synth music of the past, but it's still a great example of synth music which is used in a modern day film, modern day horror film, I guess it is. So yeah, Beyond the Black Rainbow, check it out. Okay, next one on the list is from 2013, and this excuse me, I'm starting to lose my voice. I've been a little bit ill over the weekend. I will carry on though. I've only got 2 more films to go, so we're nearly there. Next film though is called the next film though is called Under the Skin, and this has Scarlett Johansson in it. She plays an alien who preys on unsuspecting men, and I think it's set in Scotland, which is, it's kind of like, again, it's sort of more of like an independent film. I think it's a bit strange really to think of like Scarlett Johansson working on a film in Scotland, and yeah, it came out in 2013. Composer is Micah Levi. A very kind of unsettling film score, lots of sort of detuned strings, kind of like warped synth sounds, very unpredictable textures. It just creates this real sort of sense of disorientation, which again, mirrors the character and what's going on in the film. And I guess it sort of really sort of helped to kind of redefine how experimental electronic music can be used, quite successfully in sort of horror and sci-fi films. So, yeah, have a look at that one as well. Okay, we're on to the final film now. And again, as I said at the start, these are not ranked in any order, so by no means is this meant to be the best one. It's purely chronological. I know probably I've forgotten to mention some of the dates as we've gone through, but yeah, so this is the final film, and this is a film that came out in 2018. So actually, it's a few years ago now, because where are we now? We're in 2025, aren't we? So yeah, it's like 7 years ago. So it's not that recent, but if you are aware of some films that are more recent, maybe have come out in the last, in the 2020s, that are worthy of a mention, then please do drop them in the comments. Anyway, I digress. So this film is called Mandy. It features Nicolas Cage. So it came out in 2018. The composer is Johan Johansson. Did I say that right? Yes. And basically, it is the story of a man who, I think his wife is murdered, and he goes on a sort of like revenge kind of rampage spree, and yeah, it's a very dark film. It's very disturbing. There is quite an amazing chainsaw battle at one point. I can remember watching this film quite late at night around a friend's house, a few of us there, and yeah, not really prepared for what I was going to watch, but still a very good film. Yeah, the actual music though, it's a very dark score, lots of drones, sort of, I don't know, you might say sort of like doom metal kind of inspired textures, lots of sub bass, analog synth pulsing, eerie ambient weirdness, and it just kind of creates this kind of sense of dread and darkness, which the way the film's shot as well, is the sort of colours and so on in the film, it all kind of ties together to create this really menacing experience of watching this film. There's a lot of tension, and I think actually I need to watch this one again, because I only watched it once and it was quite disturbing, but I think I need to watch it again. Anyway, that is the final film. That is Mandy. Came out in 2018. So that draws us to the end of this video. I hope you have found this interesting. So yeah, let's say these are just some of the films that I have enjoyed over the years. I make that sound like I've been alive since 1956 when Forbidden Planet came out, but no. Throughout my lifetime, which is not that long, I have enjoyed these films, and I do find them sort of constant sources of inspiration for my own music, and I think that's kind of interesting because, inspiration doesn't always have to come from, listening to other music. It sort of can come from films as well, and although it is the music in the film, there's a lot of attachment between the music and the film, so it's sort of, sometimes when I'm creating music, I will sometimes be sort of trying to create something that I think would fit towards the vibe of a particular film, a film that doesn't exist perhaps, or is just imagined in my head. And a lot of these soundtracks that I've mentioned today will be a source of that inspiration as well. So I'd be interested though to know, what are your thoughts on this? What are your sort of inspirational films, or films that you class as kind of like iconic films for electronic music? Let me know in the comments, and I will see you next time. But before, I should just remind you to, if you have liked this video, then please hit the like button. If you would like to see more, hit the subscribe button, and don't forget you can always support the channel further by buying me a coffee or even signing up to my Patreon. I will see you next time. Cheerio. Whoops. Oh, goodness. I've lost my clicky thing now. It's gone down the back of there. How am I going to get back? Oh. Well, that's probably gone forever. What a disappointment. I'm going to have to find something else to twiddle. I haven't got anything else to twiddle though.